Carte.
Carte. Neuf à la banque.
I need another 1,000.
I admire your courage, Miss...
Trench. Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, got a bit of a tabletop RPG video because we're going to be diving into the world of Super Spies because I'm going to do a review of Tiny Spies. This is a role-playing game designed by Gallant Games, which is also the creators of Tiny Dungeons, and interestingly enough, they're a creator of another spy game titled Cold Shadows. Now, Tiny Spies is very different from Cold Shadows. Think of Cold Shadows as more of the realistic, it's a bit more number crunching and things of that nature, where Tiny Spies is kind of the more James Bond and Mission Impossible type spy game. It runs on the Tiny D6 system, which is a rules light system. It's very nice, and the nice thing about the Tiny D6 system is you actually only need D6s to play said game. And as I said, it's a rules light system, so there's actually not a lot of rules, there's not a lot of number crunching, there's not a lot of forethought to this type of system. It's actually a really easy to understand system, and I feel that's actually beneficial for probably most people because where a game like Dungeons and Dragons, it takes a long time. You got to kind of study the rules and get a really good grasp and understanding of the rules to get the most out of the game. And at times the rules kind of gets in the way of gameplay where you have to kind of look up a rule and you kind of got to sit there and figure out the modifiers and make judgment calls in the whole 9 yards. Tiny Spies and basically in general, the Tiny D6 system kind of puts itself out of the way and pretty much says, make the judgment call how you want to make the judgment call and go for it. And there's not a lot of rules that actually slows down the game and makes them burdensome. And also the combat system itself is really lightweight. There's not a lot of rules for that either. You can actually see the damage charts here. That's realistically how the damage charts are, unless there's other special circumstances, such as using bazookas and things of that nature. But even when it comes to these type of rules, the rules are really simple. There's also the when it comes to the character creation, it's a character creation background system where you pick an archetype, you pick your background, you pick your traits and things of that nature. It's actually all really simple. Character creation doesn't take long at all. I can actually create a character for Tiny Spies in probably about 10-15 minutes, roughly. It doesn't take long, so it makes it for a nice grab and go type of game. Now, another thing that the game covers is the creating a supercar for your spy, and I really like those rules, and it really covers everything from the self-destruct devices to machine guns to oil slicks to smoke screens, bulletproof armor, the whole 9 yards. It's all there. The only thing that's really not there is, surprisingly enough, there's no rules there for submersibles and amphibious vehicles, but because of how the system is created, you can actually really create that pretty easily yourself. Another rule I actually really like in the game too is suppressors. Suppressed pistols are definitely deadly, or can be deadly. It's kind of a can be deadly because if your opponent, is kind of expecting an attack, it's just done as a normal, ranged weapon. But with Tiny Spies, if you can surprise your enemy, suppressed weapons, melee weapons like knives can be extremely deadly. they can actually be insta-kill weapons. And I think that is actually a really cool feature with Tiny Spies, giving you that kind of more spy type feel to your game. Another thing too that I want to say with this game is it's an extremely cheap game to get into. You can actually get a copy of Tiny Spies at Drive-Thru RPG for $10. Now, me myself, I actually picked up when I picked up Tiny Spies. I picked up Tiny Spies uh, as a PDF, and I also ordered a print-on-demand hardcover rulebook. Now, unfortunately, at this time, I don't have the hardcover rulebook. I'm still waiting for that to come. But with that being said, that's not really going to sway my review of Tiny Spies because I'm reviewing the game itself and not so much the quality of the rulebook. Although I personally I don't think I will be disappointed with the quality of the rulebook. And maybe I will do a review a little bit later when it comes to that because actually this is the first time I'm getting a print on demand book. Now, when it comes to books, also, there is actually not a lot of books for this game. There is essentially a core rule book. So, yeah, instead of having a whole library of books, although of course you could have a whole library of tiny D6 systems, there's only one rule book for the game. Although, with that being said, there is actually a short adventure module as well, which is kind of nice. Now, the adventure module is only $5. It doesn't really add a lot in the way of rules, but it does introduce an adventure and it kind of gives you a peering of how to create an adventure for Tiny Spies. Now, with that being said, if you got knowledge and experience in other tabletop role playing games, pretty much doing a setup for Tiny Spies, setting up an adventure or a campaign for Tiny Spies won't be that difficult. Now, the next thing I want to point out when it comes to the PDF is the PDF itself is very well bookmarked and it can get you where you need to go really quickly. Now, of course, with that being said, the book is only about 50 pages, so it's not a very thick book, which kind of gives you an indication that there's not a whole lot of rules there as well. But it lends itself to also being able to find things quickly and easily with the bookmarks and just the fact that the book itself is pretty short. Now, one thing I do think that is kind of a flaw with the Tiny D6 system, and this is kind of a flaw I found with all the Tiny D6 systems. Understand that this is not my first one. This actually isn't even my latest one. But the assets, there's just a general lack of assets, pre-made assets with the Tiny D6 systems. Now, there's benefits and there's flaws with that. One benefit is it keeps the books very lightweight. Another benefit is it leads to a lot of creativity. You have to, sit there and kind of create your own assets and kind of shape the game into what you want the game to be. Now, with that being said, if you're looking for a game with a lot of pre-made assets that you can just grab and go, well, that's going to be kind of a problem because you're going to have to spend time making assets. Me personally, I love the creativity aspect of it. Like I said, it lends itself to a lot of creativity. You can sit there and you can create your different types of NPC templates and everything else, and you kind of know what you're getting because you're creating it yourself. And it's just one thing that's extremely beneficial, in my opinion, to games like Tiny Spies, Tiny Dungeons, or even though this is not a Tiny D6 system, even Champions, where you have a lot of building blocks to build your world. And then because you're building your own world, you know how things are and how things are created and who's the really tough guys and who's kind of like the cheap, easy to kill henchmen or easy to defeat henchmen. Where with Dungeons and Dragons, once again, you're going to have to sit down, you're going to have to study and look at the rule books and get a really good understanding of the rules and everything else. So to me, the creativity aspect or the lack of assets, pre-made assets, is actually a great benefit. when it comes to something like Tiny Spies and just tabletop RPGs in general. The one other thing though that I kind of do feel is a little bit flawed. Well, I don't know if I want to say it's flawed. It's not really flawed, but the chase mechanics, the chase system, the chase rule set, if you will, within Tiny Spies is kind of clunky, especially when you consider it to the other aspects such as combat and character creation to Tiny Spies. Now, with that being said, I think the chase rules are actually pretty well done. They're kind of confusing, and you're kind of going to have to sit there with the rule book and constantly go over the rules for your first couple chases. And then as you do the chases, it's actually going to get easier and easier because you're just going to understand the rules better. So it's not, it's honestly, the chase rules aren't so bad and so confusing that they're impossible to understand, but comparing it to the rest of the rules in Tiny Spies, it is a little confusing. But once you get it, you'll be golden. So, with all that being said, honestly, for a $10 role playing game, I recommend it. Tiny Spies is really good if you're looking for a really lightweight, easy to play, tiny D6 system. Well, not even a tiny D6 system, but like a rules light role playing game that is spy based. I think actually you couldn't go wrong with getting yourself a copy of Tiny Spies. Anyway, folks, hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for tuning in and have yourself a wonderful day.